We just wrapped up Sky Jethani's book, What If Jesus Was Serious? This was a 9-week walk through what has become known as Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. This was a healthy start for us as a new congregation, a new synodically authorized worshiping community at Journey of Faith. It provides the basis for where Jesus started and what he did in his first sermon, what he said was in his first major message. Sure, he had conversations with other folks, but this was his first foray into preaching to the masses. There is some scholarly discussions as to whether this was all one sermon or a series of sermons or a compiled collection of his teachings that was written in Matthew. Regardless, what we have is 111 verses of Jesus speaking in only 2 breaths. With the most famous opener of any sermon, Jesus began, "Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, who mourn, who are meek, who hunger and thirst for righteousness, who are merciful, who are peacemakers, who are persecuted for Jesus' sake." Then he shifts from his invitation to life-changing words that outline his mission and ministry. Live so that you are salt of the earth and the light of the world. Don't even think that freedom lets you off the hook of responsibility for knowing and doing in detail what God desires of you. It's not just your actions that matter. Your inner thoughts, feelings, and impulses must also align themselves with what please God. Do everything you can to be reconciled with those you have offended. Don't even think about betraying the promises you have made to your spouse. Let your own integrity be sufficient for your yes to be a yes and your no to be a no. Publicly expose unjust abuse. When it comes to money, treat everyone like your closest friends and family. Love your enemy. Your relationship with God is not about you. Value what really lasts and don't waste your life on what passes away. Make sure your inner light is healthy and let it shine. Stay focused and loyal to God and what is pleasing to God. Don't fret, fuss, worry, or be anxious about things you have no control over. Work on your own flaws instead of judging others. Honor everything with the honor it is due. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Don't follow the crowd. You'll lose your way. Follow my way. You'll find real life. And don't be stupid or naive about flashy promises of quick riches and painless fixes. With all this, I love to picture huge crowds of people hanging on his every word. When he finishes with his illustration of building a house on sand or a rock by saying, when the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house built on sand, it will collapse with a mighty crash. And then a long silence before he walks off. Then when the crowd begins to finally exhale as they realize he has finished, a growing cacophony of amazement starts. Jesus then, of course, goes to the back of the church to shake everyone's hand before they head out to breakfast. No. It's way more likely he is surrounded by people with questions and arguments. But then what? Jesus just rolled out insights, interpretations, and applications that were upside down to generations of teachings and traditions of the time. Matthew tells us that the crowds followed him down the hill when he then healed a leper. From there, he traveled around the area, healing the impossible. He calmed a storm as he and his disciples crossed the Sea of Galilee. There, Matthew writes about his continued healing and whirlwind of interactions, including the healing of a Roman soldier's servant. For comparison, Matthew spends 3 full chapters on the Sermon on the Mount, while the 2 chapters following covers days, if not weeks, of his travels, healings, and teachings. In the 10th chapter, Jesus calls his 12 apostles and prepares to send them out. Matthew tells us just before he gathered this gang of 12. When Jesus was traveling the region, he saw the crowds. He had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus told his disciples that the harvest is great, but the workers are few. Jesus has a lot of work to do and not enough time to do it. Jesus needs help. Think about that. If Jesus is the Son of God, God incarnate, the Word become flesh, if Jesus is even 1/10 of what billions of people have believed for 2 millennia, He shouldn't need anyone's help. Why does he need help? Jesus Christ heals the sick, restores the blind, makes the deaf hear, restores life from the dead, and even conquers death himself. Why would he need the help of these new disciples? These are his students, to whom he has only begun to teach anything. They're rookies. If Jesus is the physical manifestation of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving creator of all that was, is, and ever will be, why does he need help? By the way, if you've heard enough sermons, you know that Jesus is just speaking to his disciples of the day. He is also speaking to each one of us individually, as well as all of us as a society, too. So, he not only needs the disciples' help then, he also needs all of our help now. Again, why? Why does Jesus need our help? To heal the sick, restore the sight to the blind, make the deaf hear, restore life from the dead, and even conquer death itself. Why does he need us to help with all that? Because that is not the point. Wait, what? I think I may have just derailed this train of thought. I was trying to drive here. Todd, did you just say that Jesus' miracles are not the point, or did you just reverse yourself on Jesus needing our help? Yes. Does that help? My faith tells me that Jesus does not need our help. He did not need the help of the disciples either. Even though he did not directly come out and say, I need your help to the disciples, he did say in that metaphor of the harvest needing more workers, that more people were needed to do the work. But Jesus does not have some holy honey-do list with a series of miracles ready to be checked off when completed, or an inventory of names of people he needs to save. The work is not the work. Even if we were endowed with divine powers to cure disease, those we cure would still get sick. Jesus himself had the power to raise Lazarus from the dead, yet Lazarus still died. Not that the practice of medicine is pointless, but that was not the point of Jesus' ministry. With the wave of his holy hand, Jesus could have cured all the disease in the world at once. But that is not the help he is looking for. Instead, what Jesus couldn't do then and can't do now is create and nurture relationships among us. That is up to us. Always has been, always will be. Jesus' ministry was not some circus sideshow to show off miracles here and there. His ministry was not about strutting around, slinging divine power across the countryside. His entire ministry and purpose for being made flesh was and is to foster relationships among us and us with God. In fact, he straight up tells us that it's the greatest commandment, to love God and to love your neighbors. Again and again throughout the Gospels, Jesus is showing us how he unconditionally loves his neighbor. With the Roman soldier and the servant that he healed, that was an enemy, an oppressor of the Jewish people. What if the miracles that Jesus performed was his way to show us how to love one another with all we have? Jesus is God as human, so of course he can perform what we would call miracles. But to him, they are simply the best he can do. What he does is all he can do for the blind man. What he gives is all he can give for the deaf mute. What he shares is all he can share with the woman at the well. These are just a few ways of how Jesus showed his disciples, and he shows all of us, to love our neighbor. Jesus not only goes all in, he never expects anything in return. Time and time again, he implores those he healed to not tell anyone. Unconditional love for your neighbor means totally altering our plans and path to go above and beyond in caring for people without ever expecting anything in return. The way Jesus talked about it, loving your neighbor is wholly inconvenient, wildly selfless, and nearly impossible to do well all the time. Jesus goes on to tell us, "Don't imagine that I came to bring peace to the earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Your enemies will be right in your own household." This reflects Jesus knowing how his teaching and ministry upends what were the traditional beliefs of the time. The idea of loving your neighbor was not new to the ancient Jews. Leviticus 19 is central to the ethics of Judaism across its history. However, at the time, neighbor was construed to mean fellow Israelites. It was limited. By including everyone in the expected circle of love, in fact, by removing any circle or limit at all on that love, went hard against their grain of tradition and shook the very foundations of society at the time. Fortunately, today we get it, don't we? We understand what he meant, don't we? Do we? Do we know that loving your neighbor means caring for everyone? Do we know that loving everyone as you love yourself means loving to our fullest capabilities without condition or expectation of anything in return? Love is one of the most profound emotions known to human beings. Do we get that today? This way that Jesus talks and walks provides a wholly different lens to see each other through, doesn't it? Not only would this lens let us see members of the opposite political party as our neighbor, it would remove the need for political parties at all. Not only would this same lens let us see the folks who are fleeing their homes and seeking refuge here as our neighbors, it would erase the artificial lines that we have created that separate us as countries and as God's children. This lens erases the idea of enemies and replaces it with neighbors. Jesus sent his disciples out to preach love. Make neighbors of everyone, erase lines that separate, eliminate tribes, and override political parties, and bring everyone under one belief. God is love, and we are made in God's image. That is the message that Jesus was telling his disciples before he sent them out. I'm just passing it along to you. Love God. Love your neighbor. It's that simple. Amen.